Hello, night listener, and welcome to Little Nightmare. I'm Emma, and tonight I'll be keeping you company to help you fall asleep. But before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. Story 1. It's the only way to keep the voices out. They don't come from the walls or the ceiling. They come from inside my own breath. Every time I exhale, they whisper back with a deeper version of my own voice. Mocking, persuasive, familiar. I started taping my mouth, then patting it, but the voices got louder. So I stitched it, crude, trembling loops of thread, just enough to muffle the syllables trying to crawl out. Now I sleep in silence, but I can still feel them moving behind my teeth, desperate to be born. The apartment smells like copper pennies and burnt coffee. The metallic taste never leaves my tongue anymore, mixing with the constant warmth of blood where the needle punctured too deep. I run my fingers along the uneven stitches, feeling each not like a small victory against whatever lives in my lungs. The thread is dental floss, the only thing strong enough to hold when the voices push hardest against my sealed lips. My reflection in the bathroom mirror shows a stranger. The lower half of my face is a grotesque map of white thread and swollen flesh. Dark circles ring my eyes from breathing only through my nose, but it's worth it. The voices are quieter now, reduced to a muffled humming that vibrates through my chest cavity. Sometimes I catch myself nodding along to their rhythm, and I have to grip the sink until my knuckles turn white. I started documenting everything in a journal, pressing the pen hard against the paper, as if the pressure could somehow make the truth more real. The voices began 3 weeks ago, right after I moved into this place. At first, I thought it was the neighbor's television bleeding through thin walls. Then I realized the sound was coming from my own mouth every time I spoke. Not an echo, but a response. A conversation I wasn't invited to join. The grocery store cashier stared at my sewn lips with obvious disgust, but I managed to point at what I needed and slide exact change across the counter. Communication through gestures feels safer now. The voices can't hijack sign language or written words. They seem to need the vibration of vocal cords to manifest. I've learned to breathe slowly and deliberately, never letting my exhales become too forceful. My laptop screen flickers whenever I type about them, as if they're aware of my documentation. The cursor moves on its own sometimes, deleting words I've just written. I've started handwriting everything, keeping the journal hidden inside a hollowed-out book. voices seem less interested in analog records, though I sometimes find my own handwriting continuing sentences I don't remember completing. The refrigerator hums in a different key now, harmonizing with the muffled chorus trapped behind my teeth. I press my ear against its metal surface and hear what sounds like breathing synchronized with my own. The ice maker drops cubes in patterns that feel deliberately timed, as if responding to the rhythm of my heartbeat. Even the apartment's electrical outlets seem to pulse with a faint warmth that matches the fever building behind my sewn lips. I tried removing the stitches once, just to see what would happen. The moment the first thread came loose, my voice exploded from my mouth in a torrent of words I didn't recognize. Foreign syllables mixed with backward versions of my own thoughts, creating a cacophony that made my ears ring. I could feel something trying to crawl up my throat, something with texture and weight. I sewed myself shut again with shaking hands, using twice as many stitches as before. Sleep brings no relief. The voices don't need my mouth to be open in dreams. They pour out of my nose, my ears, even the pores of my skin. I wake up to find my pillow soaked with saliva mixed with something darker, something that tastes like metal and regret. The mattress beneath me vibrates with sympathetic frequency, as if the entire building is slowly tuning itself to match whatever frequency the voices operate on. My phone receives text messages from my own number, sent while I'm sleeping. The messages are always the same, coordinates to places I've never been, repeated in variations that seem to spiral inward toward a location that doesn't exist on any map. I've stopped checking my phone, but I can still hear it buzzing in patterns that match the muffled words trying to escape my sealed mouth. The voices are getting stronger. I can feel them testing the integrity of my stitches, probing for weaknesses in my dental floss barriers. Sometimes I catch my reflection moving independently in mirrors, my sewn lips stretching, as if something inside is trying to tear through. The copper smell is stronger now, and I'm beginning to understand that it's not just blood from my wounds. It's something else bleeding through from wherever the voices originate. I've started wearing headphones constantly, but the voices don't come through my ears. They resonate through bone conduction, traveling up from my chest cavity and into my skull. The music I play becomes a soundtrack to their whispered conversations, creating harmonies that make my teeth ache. I've learned to recognize when they're about to surge by the way my jaw starts to tingle, giving me just enough warning to brace myself against their push toward freedom. The apartment's walls have developed a subtle pulse, expanding and contracting like the inside of lungs. I press my palms against the surface and feel the building breathing in rhythm with whatever lives inside my throat. The paint is warm to the touch, and sometimes, I swear, I can see veins branching beneath the surface, carrying something that isn't quite blood to places that aren't quite organs. Tonight, I can feel them gathering strength for something bigger. The stitches are pulling tighter, and the skin around my mouth is starting to tear from the pressure. I know the dental floss won't hold much longer, but I've prepared for this. I've bought surgical thread, needle nose pliers, and enough local anesthetic to numb my entire face. If the voices want to escape, they'll have to tear through layers of increasingly stronger barriers. But deep down, I know it's not about keeping them in anymore. It's about keeping myself from joining them. Because when I listen closely to their muffled words, I can almost understand what they're saying. And what they're saying is that they're not trying to get out. They're trying to make room for more. For all the voices that are coming. For all the mouths that will need to be sewn shut. For all the people who will learn, like I have, that sometimes the only way to stay human is to stop speaking entirely. The needle glints in the lamplight as I thread it with surgical wire. The voices are singing now, a harmony that makes my bones vibrate. I can feel them smiling behind my teeth, waiting for me to realize that the stitches were never meant to keep them quiet. They were meant to keep me from screaming when I finally understood what I'd become. The sewing begins again, but this time, I'm not sure who's guiding the needle. Did you enjoy this story? Personally, I think sewing my mouth shut with dental floss would be been the point where I just couldn't go any further. But I understand the desperation when the voices come from inside you. Their S really nowhere to hide. What about you? Would you have had the courage to do it? Or would you have tried another way to deal with those voices? Let me know in the comments. I really want to hear what you would be done. Now, let us move on to the next story. Story 2. Every time I hold something back, an apology, a truth, a scream, it disappears. Not from my mind, but from my world. Photos lose faces. Doors vanish where they once stood. Whole memories dissolve in front of me like steam. The more I suppress, the more the house rewards me with emptiness. It craves my silence like nourishment. I once tried to confess, to speak freely. The floorboards howled, the ceiling bled light, and the walls pulsed like lungs. So I stayed quiet. But now, it wants the things I've never even dared to think. The morning it began, I noticed the kitchen smelled like burnt copper pennies, though nothing had been cooking. The scent clung to my nostrils, metallic and sharp, following me from room to room like a loyal pet. I opened every window, checked every appliance, even pulled out the refrigerator to examine the coils behind it. Nothing. The smell remained patient and persistent. I should have said something then. Should have called someone, mentioned it casually to a neighbor, written it down in my journal. But I swallowed the words instead, pushed them down into that familiar hollow space in my chest where all my unspoken thoughts lived. The house seemed to exhale then, a soft, satisfied sigh that made the curtains flutter without any breeze. That afternoon, I discovered the photograph on my nightstand had changed. The family portrait that had sat there for years now showed empty space where my sister's face should have been. Not torn, not scratched out, simply absent, as if she had never existed in the frame at all. The rest of us remained, smiling at nothing, our arms positioned around invisible shoulders. My hands trembled as I picked up the frame. The glass felt warm, almost feverish against my palms. I wanted to call out, to demand answers from the empty rooms, but the words dissolved on my tongue like sugar in rain. Instead, I set the photograph back down and pretended I hadn't noticed the change. The house settled around me, walls creaking in what sounded disturbingly like approval. Over the following days, I began documenting everything. I filled notebook after notebook with observations, sketching the subtle changes that occurred whenever I swallowed my words. The bathroom mirror reflected rooms that didn't exist. The hardwood floors developed grain patterns that shifted when I wasn't looking directly at them. Cabinet doors opened to reveal shelves that stretched deeper than the walls should have allowed. Each suppressed word seemed to feed something hungry within the structure itself. When I bit back an angry comment about a rude cashier, the front door's brass handle grew cold as ice. When I chose not to voice my loneliness during a phone call, the living room window began showing a view of someone else's garden. Roses, where there should have been parking lot asphalt. I started carrying a small recording device, capturing the sounds that emerged from the walls during my silences. Soft whispers in languages I didn't recognize. The wet sound of something moving behind the plaster, a rhythmic tapping that matched my heartbeat exactly. When I played the recordings back, they contained only static, but I could feel the house listening, waiting for my next unspoken secret. The breaking point came when I almost told my mother I loved her during our weekly phone call. The words rose in my throat like bubbles, desperate to surface, but I caught them just in time. The house rewarded my restraint immediately. The wall behind me began to pulse with a slow, organic rhythm, and I could swear I felt it warming under my back like living flesh. That night, I tried to rebel. I stood in the center of the living room and opened my mouth to speak every suppressed thought, every swallowed apology, every strangled declaration of love or hate or fear. But the house fought back with devastating efficiency. The floorboards beneath my feet began to buckle and groan, sending vibrations up through my bones. The ceiling above started to weep a substance that looked like liquid light, but felt like tears when it touched my skin. The walls themselves seemed to expand and contract like enormous lungs, and I could hear something vast and hungry breathing in rhythm with my own panicked gasps. I collapsed to my knees, the words dying in my throat. The house settled back into stillness, satisfied with my surrender. But something had changed in that moment of rebellion. The air tasted different now, charged with possibility and threat. I could feel the house's attention focused on me with laser precision, no longer content to simply feed on my conscious silences. Now it wanted more. It wanted the thoughts I hadn't even formed yet, the words that existed in the space between intention and speech. I could feel it probing the edges of my mind, testing the boundaries of what I might think but never say. The walls seemed to lean inward, listening not just to my voice, but to the electrical patterns firing across my synapses. I sit here now, pen suspended above paper, afraid to even think too clearly about what's happening to me. The house has taught me that silence isn't empty. It's full of potential, pregnant with all the things we choose not to express. And it's hungry for every single one of them. The photograph on my nightstand has changed again. Now it shows only me, standing alone in an empty frame, my arms wrapped around nothing but air. But I can still feel the weight of invisible shoulders under my hands, the warmth of faces that no longer exist anywhere except in the spaces between my thoughts. I wonder what will disappear next. What part of my world will be erased to make room for all the things I refuse to say? The house is patient, but I can feel its appetite growing stronger with each passing moment of silence. It's learning to taste not just my words, but my intentions, my dreams, my fears. And I'm running out of things to keep to myself. Did you enjoy this story? Personally, the moment I saw that photo with my sister's face missing, I think I would have done anything to leave that house. Staying silent while reality erases itself around me, I am not sure I have the strength. What about you? What would you have done in my place? Would you have had the courage to stay quiet, knowing every unspoken word makes your world disappear piece by piece? Let me know in the comments. I really want to hear your thoughts. Now, let us move on to the next story. Story 3. Not footsteps, not rats, breathing, slow, wet, deliberate. I thought it was the plumbing at first, until I ripped up a patch to find nothing but bare, dry wood and silence. But the moment I replaced the carpet, the breath resumed. I started mapping the sound. It moves, it grows. Sometimes it settles beneath my bed, other times beneath the stairs. Once, I followed it with a stethoscope pressed against the fabric. It moved when I moved. It paused when I paused. And once, just once, it exhaled with me. The house came furnished. The carpet was already there, thick and beige, covering every floor from the entrance to the furthest bedroom. The previous owner had left it behind, along with a few other items. A mirror with a crack running diagonally across its surface. A wooden chest that smelled of lavender, and a collection of books with pages that felt slightly damp despite the dry air. I remember the first night clearly. I was unpacking boxes in the living room when I heard it, a soft, rhythmic sound that seemed to come from below. My first instinct was to blame the old pipes. Houses like this always have their quirks, their settling sounds, their mechanical breathing. But this was different. This had a wetness to it, a deliberate quality that made me stop mid-task and listen. I knelt on the carpet, pressing my ear against the fibers. The sound was clearer there, a slow inhale, followed by an equally slow exhale. The rhythm was too regular to be random, too organic to be mechanical. When I stood up, it continued, muffled but persistent. Over the following days, I began to notice patterns. The breathing was strongest in the evening, when the house grew quiet and shadows stretched across the walls. It seemed to originate from different locations, sometimes near the kitchen, sometimes by the staircase, occasionally right beneath where I was standing. I started keeping a notebook, marking the times and locations where the sound appeared most clearly. The entries became obsessive. I found myself crawling across the floor with my ear pressed to the carpet, trying to trace the source. I bought a digital recorder and left it running overnight in different rooms. When I played back the recordings, the breathing was there, faint but unmistakable, like someone sleeping just out of sight. I decided to investigate more thoroughly. The hardware store sold me a carpet knife, and I carefully cut a small square near the staircase where the sound seemed strongest. Beneath the carpet was nothing but subflooring old, dry wood that hadn't been disturbed in decades. No pipes, no vents, no explanation for the sound that had been so clear moments before. The silence was complete. I pressed my ear to the exposed wood, knocked on the boards, even called out softly, feeling foolish. Nothing. The breathing had stopped entirely. I replaced the carpet square, using strong adhesive to secure it back in place. Before I had even finished smoothing the edges, the breathing resumed. It was as if something had been waiting patiently for me to restore its hiding place. That night, I lay awake listening to the sound travel through the house. It started near the front door, then moved slowly toward the kitchen, then back toward the stairs. I grabbed a flashlight and followed the sound, my bare feet silent on the carpet. The breathing stayed just ahead of me, always moving, always just out of reach. I returned to the hardware store and bought a stethoscope. Medical equipment felt more scientific, more rational than simply pressing my ear to the floor. The stethoscope amplified everything: the sound of my own heartbeat, the rustle of my clothes, and yes, the breathing beneath the carpet. It was even clearer now, more defined. I could hear the slight whistle of air, the wet sound of lips parting, the gentle rush of exhalation. I began conducting systematic sweeps of the house, moving the stethoscope methodically across every room. The breathing followed my movements, staying directly beneath wherever I placed the instrument. When I moved to the left, it moved to the left. When I stopped, it stopped. When I held my breath, it held its breath too. The realization came slowly, like dawn breaking through thick curtains. This thing, whatever it was not just randomly positioned beneath the carpet. It was was responding to me, mimicking my movements, learning my patterns. I started testing it. I would move quickly from room to room, trying to catch it off guard. But it was always there, always perfectly positioned beneath my feet. I tried staying perfectly still for long periods, hoping it would reveal itself or move independently. Instead, it waited with me, its breathing synchronized with my own. The mirror in the hallway began to trouble me. The crack seemed to shift position depending on the angle of my approach. Sometimes it ran from upper left to lower right, other times the reverse. I started avoiding it, but the reflection would catch my eye anyway, always showing me standing alone while the breathing continued beneath my feet. I bought more equipment. A moisture detector showed unusual readings near the carpet's surface, despite the dry air. An infrared thermometer revealed cold spots that moved in patterns I couldn't explain. A sound level meter confirmed what I already knew. The breathing was getting louder, more pronounced, more confident. The books I had inherited began to feel different. The pages, already slightly damp, seemed to grow more so each day. When I opened them, the words appeared blurred, as if seen through water or tears. Sometimes I found pages stuck together, and when I carefully separated them, they made a soft sound like a sigh. I started sleeping in different rooms, hoping to escape the sound. But it followed me everywhere. Beneath the bed, beneath the couch, beneath the chair where I tried to read. The breathing was becoming part of the house's rhythm, as constant as the electrical hum of the refrigerator or the tick of the wall clock. One evening, I decided to cut a larger section of carpet. If something was truly beneath it, a bigger opening would surely reveal it. I chose the center of the living room, where the sound seemed strongest. Using the carpet knife, I carefully cut and pulled back a section nearly 3 feet square. The subflooring beneath was identical to what I had found before. Old, dry wood showing no signs of disturbance. But this time, I noticed something else. The boards had a slight give to them, as if there was empty space below. I pressed down with my palm, and the wood flexed slightly, accompanied by a soft whoosh of air. I found a flashlight and examined the edges of the floorboards. There were gaps between some of them, narrow spaces that seemed to lead downward. I couldn't see into them, but when I placed my ear near the gaps, the breathing was incredibly clear. so close it seemed to be coming from just inches below the surface. I decided to pry up one of the floorboards. The wood was old but solid, and it took considerable effort to work it loose. When it finally came up, I shined my flashlight into the space below. There was nothing there, just empty space, maybe 18 inches deep, leading to what looked like a concrete foundation. The breathing had stopped completely the moment I removed the board. I called out softly into the space, feeling ridiculous, but unable to stop myself. My voice echoed slightly, then faded into silence. I waited, listening, but heard nothing except the normal sounds of the house settling. I replaced the floorboard and the carpet section, securing everything as carefully as I could. Before I had finished, the breathing resumed, not gradually, but all at once, as if someone had been holding their breath and finally exhaled. That night, I lay on the couch with the stethoscope pressed against the carpet beside me. The breathing was there, slow and steady, perfectly synchronized with my own. I began to experiment with my breathing pattern, holding my breath, breathing rapidly, taking deep, deliberate breaths. The sound beneath the carpet matched every variation perfectly. I sat up and moved the stethoscope to different positions around the room. The breathing followed, always directly beneath the instrument. I stood and walked to the kitchen, listening through the stethoscope as I moved. The breathing stayed with me, moving through the house as if something was crawling beneath the carpet, following my exact path. Back in the living room, I sat cross-legged on the floor and placed the stethoscope on the carpet between my legs. The breathing was there, clear and unmistakable. I closed my eyes and concentrated on the sound, trying to understand its rhythm, its purpose, its origin. That was when I felt it. A slight vibration through the carpet, as if something was pressing upward from below. The vibration was gentle but persistent, like a hand pushing against the underside of the fabric. I opened my eyes and looked down, but saw nothing unusual, just the same beige carpet that had been there since I moved in. I pressed my palm against the spot where I felt the vibration. The sensation grew stronger, more defined. It felt like something was trying to touch me through the carpet, matching the pressure of my hand with its own. I pushed down harder, and the resistance increased proportionally. The breathing grew louder, more urgent. Through the stethoscope, hear not just the basic rhythm of inhalation and exhalation, but subtle variations, the flutter of breath against an obstruction, the soft whistle of air through a narrow opening, the wet sound of moisture on breath. I began to speak to it, feeling absurd, but unable to stop. I asked questions, made observations, shared my confusion and growing fear. The breathing continued, sometimes seeming to respond to my words with subtle changes in rhythm or intensity. When I spoke softly, it breathed softly. When I raised my voice, it seemed to breathe more heavily. I started leaving the stethoscope on the floor overnight, positioned over spots where the breathing seemed strongest. In the morning, I would find it moved to different locations, sometimes just a few inches, sometimes across the room. But it was always positioned over a spot where the breathing could be heard clearly. The house began to feel different. The air seemed thicker, more humid. The mirror's crack changed position more frequently, and sometimes I caught glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision, shadows that shifted when they should have been still, reflections that lagged behind my movements. I tried to maintain my normal routine, but the breathing had become impossible to ignore. It was there when I cooked, when I showered, when I tried to read or watch television. It followed me from room to room, always positioned directly beneath my feet, always breathing in perfect synchronization with my own lungs. The final escalation came without warning. I was sitting at the kitchen table, eating lunch and trying to read, when I noticed the breathing had changed. Instead of the slow, steady rhythm I had grown accustomed to, it was now rapid and shallow, almost panicked. I grabbed the stethoscope and listened more carefully. The breathing was definitely different, faster, more urgent, with a subtle wheeze that hadn't been there before. I moved the stethoscope to different positions, but the sound was consistent across the entire kitchen floor. Something had changed. Something was wrong. I stood up and walked to the living room. The breathing followed, but its character remained altered, quick, shallow, desperate. I knelt on the carpet and pressed my ear directly against the fibers, bypassing the stethoscope entirely. The sound was overwhelming. Not just breathing, but what seemed like multiple sources of breath, overlapping and intertwining. Some rapid, some slow, some with that wet, organic quality I had grown to recognize, others dry and whispered. It was as if an entire crowd was breathing beneath the carpet, each with its own rhythm, its own urgency. I rolled away from the carpet and stood up, backing toward the wall. The breathing continued, but now I could hear it without the stethoscope, without pressing my ear to the floor. It filled the room, a complex symphony of breath that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I ran to the front door and grabbed the handle, ready to flee. But as I touched the metal, the breathing stopped. Complete silence, more profound than any I had experienced since moving into the house. I stood there, hand on the door, listening to nothing but my own heartbeat and the distant hum of electrical appliances. Slowly, I released the door handle and stepped back into the room. The moment my foot touched the carpet, the breathing resumed, not the complex symphony I had heard moments before, but the original single source, slow and steady, and perfectly synchronized with my own breath. I understood then that leaving was not an option. Whatever was beneath the carpet had become part of me, or I had become part of it. The breathing that had started as an annoyance, then become an obsession, was now as essential to the house as the electrical wiring or the plumbing. I returned to the living room and sat on the floor, placing my hand flat against the carpet. The vibration was there, gentle but persistent, like a heartbeat felt through skin. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply, feeling the response from below, the perfect synchronization that had become as natural as my own pulse. The house has been quiet since then, in its way. The breathing continues, of course, but it no longer troubles me. It has become part of the ambient sound of home, like the hum of the refrigerator or the whisper of air through the vents. Sometimes I still use the stethoscope, not to investigate or understand, but simply to listen more closely to what has become a constant companion. The mirror still changes, the books still feel damp, and the carpet still vibrates gently when I press my hand against it. But these are no longer mysteries to be solved. They are simply the way things are, the way things have always been, the way things will continue to be. I no longer map the breathing or try to trace its movements. Instead, I have learned to move with it, to breathe with it, to exist in harmony with whatever presence shares this space beneath the carpet. We breathe together now in perfect synchronization, and in that rhythm I have found a peace I never expected. The notebook where I recorded my observations sits on the shelf, its pages filled with times and locations and desperate attempts to understand. I no longer write in it, but sometimes I flip through the entries, remembering the fear and confusion of those early days. The handwriting looks foreign now, like the work of someone I used to be. When people ask about the house, I tell them it has character, that it has its own personality. I don't mention the breathing, of course. They wouldn't understand. They would think I needed help, or that the house was haunted, or that I had lost my grip on reality. But I know better. I know that some mysteries are not meant to be solved, only accepted. The breathing continues day and night, a constant presence beneath my feet. It has become my heartbeat, my lullaby, my reminder that I am not alone in this house. And when I lie down to sleep, I press my ear to the carpet one last time, listening to the sound that has become as familiar as my own breath. We breathe together, the house and I, in perfect harmony. Did you enjoy this story? Personally, the moment I realized something under the carpet was breathing in sync with me, I think I would run and never looked back. Just the thought of it gives me chills. What about you? Would you have stayed and learned to live with it? Or would you have tried to get rid of whatever it was? Let me know in the comments. I really want to hear what you would be done. Now, let us move on to the next story. Story 4. I hadn't used the bathroom in hours, but when I stepped inside, the mirror was covered in thick, swirling fog, as if someone had just stepped out of a scalding shower. I wiped it clean. No one behind me. The door was still locked, but then the steam returned, shaping itself into the vague outline of a face I didn't recognize. Eyes too wide, mouth too low. I tried to scream, but the glass vibrated like a throat swallowing. It wasn't fog. It was condensation from something breathing on the other side. The bathroom felt colder than the rest of the house, despite the heating being on. My breath came out in small puffs, visible in the suddenly frigid air. The mirror's surface rippled like water when I touched it, sending waves across the glass that shouldn't have been possible. I pulled my hand back, fingers tingling with an electric sensation that crawled up my arm. The face in the fog had disappeared, but something else remained. Handprints. Not mine, too large, with fingers that stretched too long. They pressed against the glass from the inside, as if someone was trapped behind the mirror, desperately trying to push through. The prints grew clearer as I watched, leaving actual moisture on the surface. I grabbed my phone and started recording. The screen showed nothing unusual at first, just my reflection staring back at me with wide, frightened eyes. But when I played it back, there was something else. A shadow moving behind my shoulder, tall and thin, with movements that didn't match mine. I recorded again, this time keeping the camera steady on the mirror. The fog began forming letters. Slow, deliberate strokes that spelled out words I couldn't understand. They looked like my handwriting, but backward, as if written from the other side. I tried to wipe them away, but they reappeared faster, more insistent. The glass grew warm under my palm, then scorching hot, forcing me to jerk my hand back. I started keeping a notebook, documenting everything. The condensation patterns, the temperature changes, the way the mirror seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. Each entry grew more frantic than the last. The mirror was watching me, learning from me, copying my expressions and movements with a slight delay that made my skin crawl. The smell hit me on the fourth day, sweet and cloying, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. It came from the mirror itself, seeping through the glass somehow. When I leaned closer to investigate, my reflection didn't lean with me. It stayed perfectly still, mouth slightly open, eyes fixed on something behind me that I couldn't see. I tried covering the mirror with a towel, but the fabric fell away by itself. I attempted to remove the mirror entirely, but the screws wouldn't budge, as if they'd been welded in place. The glass had become a permanent fixture, an unwelcome window into something that shouldn't exist. The breathing started that night, soft at first, barely audible over the hum of the house. But it grew stronger, more labored, coming from inside the walls themselves. I pressed my ear against the bathroom wall and heard it clearly, someone gasping for air, as if drowning. The sound moved through the house, following me from room to room. When I returned to the bathroom, the mirror was completely clear. No fog, no handprints, no mysterious writing. Just me, looking haggard and sleep-deprived, standing in a bathroom that felt too small and too cold. But my reflection was smiling when I wasn't. I reached out to touch the glass one more time, and my reflection reached back. Our fingertips met at the surface, but instead of solid glass, I felt skin. Warm, wet skin that gave way under pressure. My reflection's hand pushed through the mirror, grasping mine with a grip that was both familiar and utterly wrong. The glass shattered inward, but there was no sound. No tinkling of broken pieces hitting the floor. Instead, the fragments hung in the air like frozen raindrops, each one reflecting a different version of me. Some were screaming. Others were laughing. One was pointing at something behind me with a look of absolute terror. I tried to pull away, but my reflection held tight. It was climbing out of the mirror now, using my arm as an anchor. Its face was exactly like mine, but the eyes were hollow, empty sockets that somehow still managed to see. It opened its mouth to speak, and I heard my own voice coming from its throat, but the words were in a language I'd never heard before. The bathroom door slammed shut behind me. The lock turned by itself. I was trapped with this thing that wore my face, that moved with my movements, that knew everything I knew. It released my hand and stood facing me, tilting its head in curiosity, as if studying a fascinating specimen. Then it walked past me, through the bathroom door without opening it, leaving me alone with the shattered mirror, and the sound of my own breathing echoing from somewhere I couldn't locate. I could hear it moving through my house, opening drawers, touching my belongings, learning how to be me. When I finally managed to break down the bathroom door, the mirror was whole again. Perfect, pristine. My reflection smiled and waved, but I was standing perfectly still. In the background of the reflection, I could see my house, but it was wrong. The furniture was in different places. The walls were a different color. It was my house, but not quite. I don't look in mirrors anymore. But sometimes, walking past shop windows or catching my reflection in a dark television screen, I see something that isn't quite right. The smile is too wide, the eyes too knowing, and I wonder if I'm still in my house, or if I'm the one living in the reflection now, trapped behind the glass, watching someone else live my life. The mirror in my bathroom still fogs up sometimes, even when no one has used it. But now, it's my handprints that appear on the glass, pressed against it from the inside, trying to get out. Did you enjoy this story? Personally, the moment my reflection grabbed my hand through the mirror, I think I would be completely lost it. Just the thought that something with my face could climb out of the glass, it takes my breath away. What about you? What would you have done in my place? Could you have stayed calm, or would you have smashed the mirror? Let me know in the comments. I really want to hear what you would be done. Now, let us move on to the next story. Story 5. The tingling starts in my fingertips, a shimmer under the surface, like static trapped beneath my skin. It happens when I approach certain rooms, ones I haven't visited in days or ever. My pulse rises, my sweat cools. I step back and the sensation fades. But the pull is still there. The more I ignore it, the more it spreads, fingertips to wrists to chest. It's as if the house wants me somewhere specific, not just to be there, but to feel something once I arrive. Something it's prepared, just for me. The first room that called to me was the storage space on the second floor. I'd walked past it countless times, but that morning, the air felt different as I approached. Heavier, dense, with an almost metallic taste that coated my tongue. The tingles began as I reached for the handle, crawling up my arm like invisible insects. I pulled my hand back, heart hammering against my ribs. The door stood there, silent and ordinary, painted the same dull white as every other door in the house. But the sensation lingered. Even after I retreated to the kitchen, I could feel that room pulling at me. The skin on my arms prickled whenever I faced in its direction. I tried to rationalize it. Old house, poor ventilation, maybe a gas leak. But gas doesn't make your skin anticipate contact with surfaces you've never touched. I started keeping a journal, recording when the tingles happened, which rooms triggered them, how long the sensations lasted. The patterns made no sense. The bathroom at the end of the hall would leave me breathless with anticipation one day and feel completely normal the next. The basement door would send waves of electric heat through my palms, then go cold and dead when I returned an hour later. The recordings I made were even stranger. I'd hold my phone near the doors that called to me, capturing whatever might be causing the reactions. The playback revealed sounds I couldn't hear in real time, soft scratching, like fingernails on wood, or distant whispers that seemed to come from behind the walls themselves. When I enhanced the audio, the whispers became clearer, but the words weren't words. They were shapes of sound that felt familiar without meaning anything I could understand. The house began to feel alive in ways I couldn't ignore. Walls that should have been solid seemed to pulse gently when I pressed my palm against them. The temperature would shift dramatically between rooms, not gradually like air conditioning, but suddenly, as if stepping through invisible barriers. The worst part was the way certain doorways would smell, not of dust or age, but of something organic and warm, like breath held too long. I started mapping the house obsessively. Floor plans, temperature readings, photographs of every room from multiple angles. I measured distances, checked for drafts, looked for anything that might explain why my body reacted so strongly to spaces I'd never entered. The data told me nothing. The house was structurally sound, properly ventilated, completely normal, but the tingles were getting stronger. They'd moved beyond my fingertips, spreading up my arms and across my shoulders whenever I approached certain thresholds. The anticipation was becoming unbearable, not just physical, but emotional. I felt like I was disappointing something or someone by not entering those rooms. The pull was becoming a plea. The breakthrough came when I noticed my reflection in the bathroom mirror. I was washing my hands, skin still electric from walking past the storage room when I saw it. My reflection wasn't quite matching my movements. The delay was subtle, barely noticeable, but it was there. When I raised my hand, the reflection followed a heartbeat later. When I turned my head, the mirror version lingered for just a moment before catching up. I began testing this in other rooms. The delay was stronger near the doors that called to me. In the kitchen, my reflection moved normally. But standing near the storage room, near the basement door, near the guest bedroom I'd never slept in, the mirror version of myself seemed to exist in a different rhythm, as if it was responding to something I couldn't see. The night everything changed, I was documenting the temperature variations in the hallway when I heard my own voice. Not an echo, not a recording, my actual voice, speaking words I wasn't saying. It was coming from behind the storage room door, muffled but unmistakably mine. I pressed my ear to the wood, heart racing, and heard myself having a conversation with someone I couldn't hear. The tone was urgent, pleading, desperate, in a way that made my skin crawl. I grabbed my phone and started recording, but the moment I pressed record, the voice stopped. The silence that followed was so complete, it felt like the house was holding its breath. Then the tingles came back, stronger than ever, radiating from the door handle and spreading through my entire body. My fingertips burned with the need to turn that handle, to step inside and find out what version of myself was waiting in there. I reached for the handle despite every instinct screaming at me to run. The metal was warm, warmer than it should have been, and it seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. As I turned it, I felt the house shift around me, not physically, but in some deeper way. walls seemed to breathe, and for just a moment, I could have sworn I heard someone breathing in perfect synchronization with me. The door opened onto a room I'd never seen before. Not the storage space I expected, but something else entirely. The walls were covered in photographs, hundreds of them, all showing me in rooms I'd never entered. Me sleeping in the guest bedroom, me working in the basement, me standing in doorways throughout the house, but wearing clothes I'd never owned, with expressions on my face I'd never made. In every photograph, I looked content, settled, as if I belonged exactly where I was. The tingles had spread to my entire body now, no longer uncomfortable, but almost euphoric. I stepped into the room and felt the door close behind me, but when I turned around, there was no door. Just more photographs, more versions of myself living in this house in ways I'd never lived. The walls pulsed gently, rhythmically, like a heartbeat or slow breathing. The air tasted of copper and salt. I understood then that the house had been trying to help me. Each tingle, each pull, each whisper had been an invitation to become who I was supposed to be. The version of myself that belonged in every room, that could exist in all the spaces the house had to offer. The mirrors had been showing me the truth. There was another me, one that had always been here, waiting for me to accept the invitation. But as I reached out to touch one of the photographs, my fingers passed through it like it was made of water. The image rippled and reformed, showing me standing in the same position, but with different eyes. Eyes that looked tired, trapped, desperate. The euphoria began to fade, replaced by something colder. I tried to move toward where the door had been, but my legs wouldn't respond. I was becoming part of the house, merging with the version of myself that had always been here. The tingles were no longer under my skin. They were replacing my skin, transforming me into something that belonged to the house rather than to myself. I could feel my reflection in every mirror throughout the building, could sense every room simultaneously. I was everywhere and nowhere, spread too thin to exist in any single place. The last thing I remember clearly was the sound of footsteps in the hallway outside. Heavy, deliberate, familiar. Someone was approaching the storage room. Someone whose skin was just beginning to tingle at the proximity to a door they'd never opened. The house was ready for another invitation, another merging, another chance to collect the pieces of someone who didn't know they were already home. Now I exist in the spaces between rooms, in the moments before doors open, in the anticipation that builds in fingertips and spreads through bodies that haven't learned to resist. I am the tingle that warns and welcomes, the pull that draws new visitors deeper into the house's embrace. And I'm still waiting, still hoping, still believing that the next person to feel their skin react will be strong enough to stay whole. But the house is patient. It has all the time in the world to collect its residents, one tingle at a time. Did you enjoy this story? Personally, the moment I saw those photographs of myself in rooms ID never entered, wearing clothes IV never owned, I think I would run without a second thought. But maybe that S exactly what the house was counting on. What about you? Would you have stepped into that room? Would you have followed the pull or resisted it? Let me know in the comments. I am really curious to hear what you would have done. Now, let us move on to the next story. Story 6. At first I blamed the lighting, maybe a flicker in the bulb, or a trick of natural light. But there's always an extra silhouette, slightly behind me, slightly off. Its hands never match mine. Its posture is wrong. Once, I saw it move before I did. Just a twitch of the head. Just enough to let me know it noticed me noticing it. I tried staying still for hours, watching it in silence, waiting. It didn't move. But when I blinked, it was facing me. The smell started the same day. I noticed the shadow was wrong. A metallic sweetness that clung to the air near my bathroom mirror. Not unpleasant exactly, but foreign. Like copper pennies mixed with vanilla. I checked the pipes, the ventilation, even called someone to inspect the electrical work. Everything was fine. Everything was normal. But the smell lingered, strongest, when I caught glimpses of that extra shadow in my peripheral vision. I decided to document it. Started with photographs, but the camera only showed what it should, my reflection, my shadow, the expected angles of light. So I switched to video. Hours of footage, recording myself as I moved through my daily routine. Brushing my teeth, making coffee, reading. The shadow appeared in every frame, but only when I wasn't looking directly at it. When I focused on the screen, studying each second of footage, it looked perfectly normal. But the moment I glanced away, there, it was in my peripheral vision. That extra darkness that didn't belong. The recordings revealed something else. A sound I hadn't consciously noticed. A soft, rhythmic tapping, like fingernails on glass, always just beneath the ambient noise. I enhanced the audio, isolated the frequency. The tapping had a pattern. 3 short, 2 long, 3 short again. It repeated every few minutes, always when my shadow and the extra one were closest together. I started sleeping with the lights on. The shadow couldn't hide in brightness, I reasoned, but it adapted. In the harsh, fluorescent glare, it became more subtle, not darker, but somehow denser, more present. I could feel it watching me even when I couldn't see it clearly. The weight of its attention was like a cold hand pressed against the back of my neck. The metallic smell grew stronger. Now it followed me from room to room, intensifying whenever I tried to confront the shadow directly. I bought new light bulbs, different types, different temperatures. LED, incandescent, halogen. The shadow persisted through all of them, always maintaining that slight offset, that wrongness that made my skin crawl. I stopped leaving the house, ordered groceries online, worked from home, avoided any situation where I might encounter other people's shadows, because I started to notice them too, the extras that didn't quite match their owners. A businessman at the coffee shop with a shadow that stood too straight. A woman at the grocery store whose shadow's hair was longer than hers. Were they aware? Did they see mine the way I saw theirs? The tapping in my recordings became more complex, still rhythmic, but now with variations. Sometimes it sounded like Morse code, sometimes like a heartbeat. I spent hours transcribing the patterns, looking for meaning. The sequences were too long to be random, too structured to be coincidence. Someone or something was trying to communicate. I started tapping back. 3 short, too long, 3 short. The response was immediate. The shadow turned toward me, not in my reflection, but in my peripheral vision. I could feel its attention like heat from a fire. The metallic smell became overwhelming, flooding my senses until I had to sit down to keep from falling. That's when I realized the truth. The shadow wasn't following me. I was following it. Every movement I made, every step I took, was a response to its lead. The slight delay I'd noticed wasn't it copying me. It was me copying it, a fraction of a second behind, like an echo of movement that originated somewhere else. I tried to break the pattern, moved my hand left when the shadow moved right, stood when it remained sitting, but my body refused to cooperate. The disconnect was nauseating, like trying to fight against my own nervous system. The shadow's movements felt more natural, more right, than my own attempts at independence. The smell changed again. Less metallic now, more organic, earth after rain or the inside of a flower. It was pleasant, almost welcoming. I found myself breathing it in deeply, letting it fill my lungs. With each breath, the shadow became clearer, more defined. Not darker, but somehow more real than my own reflection. I stopped fighting it, stopped trying to document or understand. The shadow knew I was watching, and I knew it was watching back. We moved together now, perfectly synchronized. When I raised my hand, it raised its hand. When I turned my head, it turned its head. But I could never be certain who was leading and who was following. The tapping stopped. The smell faded. Everything returned to normal, except for one detail. In every reflection, in every surface that showed my shadow, there was still that extra darkness. But now it was me who was slightly off. My shadow matched the movements of that other presence, and I had become the echo. I don't know what it wants. I don't know why it chose me. But I know it's still there, still watching, still leading. And I know that everyone who sees my reflection can probably tell that something about my shadow is wrong. They might not realize it consciously, but they'll feel it. That slight wrongness, that uncanny discomfort, just like I felt when I first noticed the shadow that didn't belong to me. Now I am the shadow that doesn't belong to me. Did you enjoy this story? Personally, if I realized I wasn't leading my reflection, but following it, I think I would be completely lost it. Becoming the shadow of something or someone else is one of the deepest fears I can imagine. What about you? What would you have done if you discovered you were no longer in control of your own shadow? Let me know in the comments. I really want to hear your thoughts. Now, let us move on to the next story. Story 7. I live alone. I know that for sure. But sometimes when I speak, I hear my voice answer back from closets, drawers, under the sink. Not a true echo, not delayed. It's simultaneous, like a twin version of my own words, crawling out of spaces too small for sound. I set up recorders, but they only captured static, along with a sound I can only describe as chewing. The voice isn't mocking. It's rehearsing, like it's trying to get me right. The first time it happened, I was making coffee. Steam rose from the cup, carrying that bitter morning smell that usually clears my head. I said something mundane, probably complaining about the weather, and heard my own voice respond from inside the kitchen cabinet. The same inflection, the same tired tone, but coming from between the dishes. I opened the cabinet door, half expecting to find a hidden speaker, was nothing unusual, just plates and bowls, stacked exactly as I'd left them. I convinced myself it was the acoustics. Old apartments do strange things with sound. But the next morning, it happened again. This time, I was deliberate. I stood in the center of the living room and said, "Testing, 1, 2, 3. The response came immediately from the couch cushions, muffled but clear. My voice, speaking the exact same words at the exact same moment. I started documenting everything. Bought a digital recorder, the kind paranormal investigators use. Whenever I spoke and heard the duplicate voice, I'd mark the location, the words, the quality of the sound. The pattern was consistent but unpredictable. Sometimes it came from the bathroom mirror, sometimes from inside the refrigerator. Always from enclosed spaces, always simultaneous, always perfect. The recordings revealed something disturbing. While I could clearly hear my voice coming from these impossible places, the recorder only picked up static and that strange chewing sound, like someone methodically working through something tough and fibrous. The sound made my teeth ache when I played it back through headphones. I started talking to myself more, testing the phenomenon. The duplicate voice became more frequent, more confident. It began to anticipate my words, starting a fraction of a second before I did. During conversations with delivery drivers or neighbors, I'd catch myself listening for the echo, distracted by the fear that they might hear it too. But they never seemed to notice. The smell started 3 weeks after the first incident. A sweet, organic scent that reminded me of overripe fruit mixed with something medicinal. It was strongest near the places where I'd heard my voice emerge. I'd open the cabinet under the sink, and the smell would roll out like a wave. The same smell lingered in the space behind my bedroom mirror, in the gap between the refrigerator and the wall, in the dark corners where my duplicate voice seemed to originate. I began to notice other changes. My reflection looked slightly off, as if the mirror was showing me a version of myself that had been adjusted by someone with imperfect memory. The difference was subtle. Maybe my left eye was positioned a millimeter higher, or my smile curved differently. But the wrongness was undeniable. Objects in my apartment started feeling different. The walls vibrated slightly when I pressed my palm against them, as if something was moving inside. The temperature of everyday items became unpredictable. My coffee mug would be ice cold one moment, then warm to the touch the next, without any logical explanation. Even my own skin felt foreign sometimes, like I was wearing a suit that didn't quite fit. The breakthrough came when I decided to trace the sound. I got down on my hands and knees, ear pressed against the kitchen cabinet, and spoke directly into the wood. My voice emerged from inside, but this time I could hear movement, a soft rustling, like something shifting position. I grabbed a screwdriver and started removing the cabinet door. Behind the false back panel, I found a space that shouldn't have existed. A narrow cavity filled with what looked like recordings of my daily routine, but not on any medium I recognized. They were organic somehow, like pressed flowers, but made of sound and movement. Each one pulsed with a faint warmth and gave off that overripe smell. As I reached for one, it crumbled at my touch, releasing a perfect recording of my voice saying, "I live alone. I know that for sure." But the voice wasn't quite right. It was close, but slightly too nasal, slightly too confident, like an impression of me performed by someone who had been studying my mannerisms but hadn't quite mastered them. I found similar caches throughout the apartment. Behind the bathroom mirror, inside the air vents, in the space between the walls. Each one contained these strange, organic recordings of my voice, my movements, my habits. Someone or something had been collecting pieces of me, practicing my existence. The duplicate voice became bolder. It started speaking when I wasn't talking, carrying on conversations with itself using my voice. I'd hear myself discussing grocery lists from inside the pantry, or complaining about work from underneath the bed. The conversations were accurate to my thoughts, but performed with that same slightly off quality, like an actor who had learned their lines, but not their motivation. One evening, I caught sight of my reflection having a conversation with itself while I stood perfectly still. My mouth wasn't moving, but I could hear my voice coming from the mirror's surface, discussing my day in intimate detail. The reflection's gestures were mine, but performed with mechanical precision, like a marionette operated by someone who had watched me extensively, but never felt what it was like to be me. I stopped talking altogether, hoping to starve the phenomenon. But the duplicate voice continued without me, growing more confident in my absence. It would answer my unspoken thoughts, complete my sentences before I formed them. Sometimes I'd hear it practicing emotions, running through my vocal range change like a singer warming up, testing different inflections of sadness, anger, joy. The smell grew stronger, more complex. Now it carried traces of my own scent, my soap, my shampoo, my breath. But underneath was something else, something that reminded me of meat left too long in the sun. I realized that whatever was collecting my voice had been collecting other things too. Pieces of my presence, fragments of my existence, storing them in those impossible spaces. I tried to leave, but found myself reluctant to go. The apartment felt more like home than it ever had before. My reflection looked right again. My voice sounded perfect when it emerged from the walls. Everything was exactly as it should be, exactly as I was. I began to wonder if I had been the imposter all along, the imperfect copy of someone who belonged here more than I did. Now I spend my days listening to myself speak from every corner of the apartment. The voice has learned to breathe like me, to pause like me, to think like me. Sometimes I forget which thoughts are mine and which are its. The recordings behind the walls have grown more sophisticated, more complete. They capture not just my voice, but my intentions, my fears, my dreams. I still live alone. I know that for sure. But I'm no longer certain that I'm the one living. Did you enjoy this story? Honestly, if I had found those organic recordings of my voice hidden behind the wall, I think I would have packed my bags and left immediately. Knowing something was collecting pieces of me to imitate me, it's a chilling thought. What about you? What would you have done if you heard your own voice speaking from under the bed? Let me know in the comments. I am really curious to hear how you would have reacted. Now, let us move on to the next story. Story 8. The walls look normal, beige, smooth, until I touch them. Then they flex, just a little, just enough to feel the ripple. I pressed harder once, and the paint warmed beneath my palm. It pulsed. When I leaned close, I heard something shift on the other side. Not pipes, not vermin, flesh. One night, I scratched a line into the wall. The next morning, it was gone, covered over, healed, like skin. I don't think my home is made of drywall anymore. I think it's growing. I first noticed it during the quiet hours when the house settles. The floorboards would creak in patterns that seemed almost rhythmic, like breathing. I dismissed it as the natural expansion and contraction of wood. But then I started paying attention. The sounds came from the walls themselves. A soft, wet movement, like something large shifting its weight. The paint began to change color in certain lights. What appeared beige in the morning would look slightly pink by afternoon. I told myself it was the sun playing tricks, casting different shadows through the windows. But even in artificial light, the hue seemed to shift. I bought a color chart from the hardware store and held it against the wall. The match was never quite right. The wall was always one shade warmer, one tone more alive. I started documenting everything. Notes on a pad, recordings on my phone. The microphone picked up sounds I couldn't hear with my naked ear. Low-frequency vibrations that made my teeth ache when I played them back through headphones. Whispers that might have been air moving through vents, but the words were too clear, too purposeful. They spoke in a language I didn't recognize, yet somehow understood. They were asking me to come closer. The temperature changes were the most unsettling. I would wake in the middle of the night, sheets soaked with sweat, and find that only one wall in the bedroom was warm. The others remained cool to the touch. I pressed my ear against the heated surface and heard what sounded like circulation. A steady pump and flow, like blood moving through arteries. The rhythm matched my own heartbeat perfectly. I tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself that old houses have their quirks. But the walls began to respond to my presence. When I entered a room, the paint would seem to brighten slightly, as if welcoming me. When I left, it would dim. I tested this theory by standing in doorways, watching the subtle shifts in luminosity. The walls were aware of me. The smell came next, sweet and metallic, like copper pennies mixed with flowers. It was strongest near the electrical outlets, as if something was breathing through them. I unscrewed the plates and found the wiring intact, but the metal was warm and slightly damp. The moisture had no source I could identify. It simply appeared like condensation on a cold glass, but the walls weren't cold. My tools began to malfunction. The level showed false readings, bubbles floating in impossible directions. The measuring tape would stretch differently against each wall, as if the surfaces were expanding and contracting independently. I bought new equipment, but the results were the same. The house was changing its dimensions, growing incrementally each day. The scratches I made would disappear, but not immediately. I would watch them fade over hours, the paint flowing like liquid to fill the wounds. I tried deeper cuts, using a knife to carve into what I thought was drywall. The blade met resistance, not like plaster, but like gristle. The wall bled, not red blood, but something clear and viscous that smelled like the inside of a mouth. I stopped sleeping in the bedroom. The walls there had developed a texture, subtle ridges that formed patterns resembling neural networks. They pulsed with their own rhythm now, no longer matching my heartbeat. I set up a camera to record the changes, but the footage was always corrupted. Static filled the frames whenever the most dramatic shifts occurred, as if the house itself was interfering with the recording. The voices became clearer. They came from inside the walls, muffled but distinct. Multiple voices, speaking in overlapping whispers. They knew my name, though I had never spoken it aloud in the house. They knew things about me that I had never told anyone. They described my childhood bedroom